relaxing all the rules that you have for a practice such as this, so that if you need to change your posture, you give yourself permission to. If you need a sip of water, if you need to stretch, you'll find that your whole experience changes when you stop forcing yourself, when you know you're voluntarily here. I'll ring the bell, and we let the bell symbolize the beginning of this session. Let's be more specific. This session, this hour that we have together. Almost as though it was like the beginning of a new chapter in a book that you might have been reading. There are many previous chapters, many different previous chapters. There's the chapter a few moments ago where you were preparing for this practice. That was that chapter where we had those conversations, where we were talking, where we were smiling. There were the chapters before that where you might have been involved in work, food, and there would have been chapters before that where you woke up and whatever happened yesterday and the days before, and the chapters, they go back deep into our histories, and that's the advantage of opening a new chapter. And this is where we open the chapter. Here comes the bell, and if you like, you can visualize yourself climbing into your body, because very often we're still at one of those previous chapters, still rushing to get here, still occupied with a meeting that's past, and sometimes it's just completely fast forwarded into the future, where you're going through your routine, the timetable, the things you have to do. And so when the bell rings, arrive into your body, and we do that through our different senses, through our 5 senses. Notice which senses are indicative of you being seated here. You can start with your head, feeling the weight of your head resting on your neck, and your neck somehow connected to the shoulders. And underneath your shoulders would be your chest, your back, and right at the center of all of that, your spinal column. So begin tracking your spinal column, which seems to connect the skull all the way down to the base of the spine, which rests on the pelvic bone. And one very simple way in which we can adjust our postures by stretching the tail end downwards and stretching the top end of the spinal column upward, noticing how that gives you a few millimeters, perhaps even a centimeter of height, while bringing a slightly higher degree of alertness. And this is a rather strange experience, because if you bring your attention to your sense of sight, for most of us, the eyelids are shut, the eyes are closed, but you can still see shadows through the eyelids. Very, is it brown or red? It doesn't really matter, but you know that the eyelids are shut. And the reason for this being quite unusual is because you are fully awake, alert, and most of the times our eyes are shut. We're either getting ready for a nap or sleep. And so we know we've entered into a rather special segment, a rather unique segment in our day. The sense of hearing. You can hear my voice. And so that's something different as well. You can hear the gaps in between the sounds that are emanating from my vocal cords. That gap there. And notice how the words are formed, how the words are dependent on those gaps of silence in between these sounds. And we begin to appreciate the silence more than before. We also listen out for the silence behind every sound, acknowledging how precious these sounds are as well. And we know that if we've been to loud parties or concerts, or even stood near a plane as we were about to board it or disembark, how loud sounds, they block out everything. And so the simple fact that we can hear most of the sounds around us, we attribute to the silence in the background, which allows these sounds to surface. And the beautiful thing about this practice is that you don't have to listen to a word that I'm saying, because the true practice is in the silence and the space and the gaps. My voice is here to guide you towards those gaps. That silence behind the sounds. And so you can always leave my voice and return to my voice when and if you choose to, knowing that you have all of the tools at your disposal to find alignment with this present moment. You've noticed your spinal column, its arch. Now we continue to explore the body, just so that we can establish that it is here. Its posture, keep it as simple as possible. We're just establishing. Our eyes are closed, and so we can't really see ourselves sitting. And so we're just exploring the other indicators that point towards this, that we are seated. And so there's the pelvic region. You've noticed your spinal column resting on the pelvic region, right at the base of the pelvic. And right underneath, you You can feel this whole region resting on the chair, on the mats, on the cushions. And then there are your legs. If you're seated on a chair, you might feel the soles of your feet resting on carpets or flooring, and if your legs are folded somehow, you can feel the folds, you can feel the joint, the knee joint. And whatever it is you would experience at those points of contact between the skin, maybe the skin of the calf and the skin of underneath your leg. Are you beginning to experience what it feels like to be seated or lying down, if that's the posture you've adopted? No rules with regard to posture, but just a journey in discovering. And then you begin to notice, mentally at least, that your body is here. Your body has most certainly arrived at this practice. But this is a practice where, right at the outset, we begin with a presumption that the mind is a separate entity from this body. And if you want to understand where this presumption comes from, just notice where your mind is. For most of us, the mind, it might still be moving around, but arriving, getting glimpses of what it's like to be in the present moment. As we were guiding ourselves through this experience of being seated here, there would have been glimpses as to where the mind aligned itself with the body, with the skin, with the bone, with the structure, and then depending on the momentum that we've picked up through our morning experiences, the experiences over the past few days, the mind might return to one of those events, experiences in the past. And if you've been looking at the news or reading about some problem that's come up at work, your mind might even be projecting itself into the future, visualizing, imagining what would unfold, and actually believing that to be true. And so the mind may not have arrived. In fact, in all likelihood, it hasn't arrived into this present moment. But if the mind is a separate entity, at least if we assume that the mind is a separate entity, we're not going to have a problem with that. We're just simply going to observe it. Which brings us to that third part of who we could potentially be. That part which we sometimes call the witnessing presence, consciousness, awareness, stillness. And teachers like Eckhart Tolle, they simply sum it all up and call it the present moment. The eternal present moment, which is what we've started to have glimpses into. Where we can observe the body and its 5 senses, which are our doorways into the present moment. And the mind, which jumps from the future and into the past, back into the future. And then we remind ourselves when we see these movements and this momentum that we're not here to wrestle against these thoughts. We're not here to push against them. But perhaps to simply develop a new relationship with our mind, which is made up of many different thoughts. If you can imagine the mind as you would a piece of fabric, made up of individual pieces of thread, which is what fabric is usually made of. Made up of individual pieces of thread, and each thread representing a single thought. And each thought we've repeatedly thought it over and over again, which means each time we repeatedly think a thought, a new thread appears, and then another one. And then we have other thoughts, and soon we have a very large piece of fabric. Depending on how many pieces of thread there are, we notice how much it filters all of our experiences, sometimes completely blocking away the light, the clarity, the truth of things. And this is a practice where instead of attempting to struggle through and cut a hole through this fabric, instead of attempting to push through it, or even take peeks through it, we simply discover that by simply stepping aside, we can see over it and around it. Because it is a separate entity. And because the present moment, it's underneath this thin piece of fabric, thin or thick, but the space is, this present moment is so much more vast. It's underneath and it goes around the fabric, and it's above the fabric, and it's all over, just like the silence behind every sound, just like the silence and the gaps in between the sounds that are coming out of my vocal cords. Silence is eternal, the space is eternal, the present moment is eternal. I'll ring the bell now, just so that we can begin this process of entering into the present moment more fully, exploring some of the tools that we have at our disposal. tools that have always been with us, tools that we already know about, tools that we've already practiced with. But at this point, we remind ourselves that this practice is unlike any degree we've ever earned. It's unlike any of the qualifications we've accumulated in our life. Whatever your qualifications or skills are, where we've had to go to school and memorize and reproduce. This is a practice where the past has no relevance, where you experience everything for the first time. The tools may be the same, but the experiences, they change. Why do the experiences change? The experiences change because we are constantly changing. And so let us invoke with the sound of the bell of the beginner's mind, where we step outside of those previous chapters where all of those previous practices lie, and enter into this practice for the first time, all beginners, with the wonder, the curiosity of the young child who exists within us, climbing out of all of the stories that we've accumulated and into these bodies. The sense of hearing activated once again. Where you feel the ripples of sound, almost visualizing them if you're a more visual person, as little pebbles dropping into the center of a still lake. And these sound waves traveling into your experience through the speakers on your computers or your phones, and inviting these sound waves into your body and through your body. These bodies which appear to be solid but are no different from clouds made up of atoms and molecules with nothing but space in between them. Perhaps atoms and molecules that are organized in a slightly more dense manner than the clouds. But nevertheless, as the scientists would remind us, space, which would allow these sound waves to pass through them. As you allow these sound waves to enter into your bodies, as you allow them to move through your bodies, allow your forms to dissolve, but noticing any particular parts within your body that might be holding back these sound waves. And usually these parts of the body, you might find them a little bit tense, tight. You'll usually notice these, for me, I usually notice them around my shoulders, around my forehead, behind my eyebrows, sometimes even my jawbone and the muscles behind my eyes, but allowing all of these and any other pockets of tightness within your body to simply dissolve a little bit more each time they're touched by these sound waves. You might even feel your body becoming lighter and lighter and lighter. Notice how I referred to your body as your body. Because in this practice, we assume that the body is also a separate entity from the witnessing stillness, the witnessing presence. And so we observe, entering into a greater state of allowings, feeling the weight of your body and how the weight pushes down on the surface underneath you. Notice the balancing effect. Notice how the surface underneath you pushes back in exactly the same force that your body pushes down on. There's a perfect balancing. And we know that because if there was any more force coming from underneath you, you'd be moving upward and floating up. Feel the weight of your body, the way your body contours to the surface underneath you. The muscles in your arms loosening themselves, your joints, the eyelids, and becoming aware of the expression that you're wearing on your face, your lips, your nose, and the facial muscles as experienced from within. And then back to the ears, exploring the sounds at this moment, this very moment. Whether it's the sound of the bell or its resonance, its echo. Bringing your attention to your breath and that flow of air. Because if you notice, we're surrounded by air. We know that mentally, we know that we're surrounded by air molecules, oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen. How does this air feel on your skin? It's not very easy to detect, is it? Unless can you sense any movement in the air around you? In particular, around those areas of skin which are exposed. You might experience movement if your window is open or if you have a fan in the room, but otherwise it might feel quite still. But one way in which we can experience this air is through our nostrils. And so let's bring our attention from around our body towards the nostrils, towards the upper lip, and then that ability to experience through the skin within the nasal passage, which experiences the air and its movements, the air entering and leaving. And even with this, even with the breath, it's somewhat limited to just the sensations. That's it. We don't really know what air feels like, but we know what it feels like as it brushes against our skin. And isn't that how we decipher and experience the whole world around us, from the food we eat to the music we listen to? Everything is just through the senses. And so bringing your attention to this movement, this very subtle movement, well, of course, it just depends on how fast or slow you're breathing right now. But the sensations, the temperature of the air, which is so different between the in-breath and the out-breath. Noticing, yes, the out-breath, it feels so much warmer. Humidity levels, how the out-breath, how the exhalation, the humidity level increases significantly. Almost as though some magical transformation occurred within that split second. As the breath moved through our body. And then you can tell the direction, the direction of the flow. Sometimes moving inwards, sometimes moving outward. You may wonder, why am I talking about these very obvious meanings? Humidity, warmth, in-breath, out-breath. Why would I be mentioning this during this practice? Because it's so obvious. We're exploring these meanings simply because when we can tell that we're taking an in-breath, we know that the mind has left its past, it's left its future, and it's joined us into this present moment. It's joined us in this present moment. Because in this present moment, if we existed only in this moment, we wouldn't know what an in-breath is, we wouldn't know what an out-breath is. We only know what an in-breath is because the mind has learned what an inhalation is. The mind has learned about direction, what air flowing into the body feels like, what an outward flow feels like. It's given it names and labels: in-breath, out-breath, inhalation, exhalation. And the same thing with the temperature. In this present moment, all you feel is a sensation. For there to be warmth, there needs to be coolness. For there to be humidity, there needs to be dryness. And that's where we begin to recognize how useful the mind is as a tool, only as a tool, to help us translate the present moment, experiences, the experiences around us. And as we explore, you notice your thoughts. They will take you away from this practice. They will take you into something, a conversation, an event, an experience in the past, or one of those future things that have never happened yet and probably never will. And when that happens, just smile and allow it to happen. And the minute you allow it to happen and you give it permission, you'll notice that you have awoken the witnessing presence. You have returned back into that space where the witness is. And then you bring yourself back to the sensation. And you continue to experience the sensation that is being translated through the mind. And in this way, you begin to experience the stillness of the present moment. We begin to also recognize how precious a tool the mind is, how it filters all of the experiences around us. Very recently, I listened to one of my teachers, and she gave a really good example of this effect, of the effect of the mind on our experiences. And just visualize yourself receiving 2 separate phone calls, where one phone call was from someone you know very well. One phone call from perhaps a family member, a friend, a partner, someone you know very well. And the second phone call from a complete stranger, might have been a wrong number. Now imagine that in each one of these calls, the person speaking said very hurtful words that were quite unpleasant, and some of us don't have to imagine it because it sometimes happens to us in this world in which we live in, where we have so many different relationships. And then she asked us to imagine how differently we would feel under both these circumstances. For the person you know, the person you might even care about, if they were to say those hurtful words, we would be affected. And we would feel different types of emotion, anger, sadness, frustration, depending. And then for the wrong number that came through, we would probably laugh it off and just say, wrong number, I don't really care, don't know you, don't care. Same words were being used. Absolutely same words, but they had profoundly different effects on us. And in both cases, we were either sitting just as we are right now, or standing, or walking, receiving the call. But our thought affected our experience. In both cases, we just received a call where the same words were being used. But in each relationship, in each of those calls, we had different expectations, different ideas, and we were affected differently. And in the same way, during this practice, if the doorbell rang, if my doorbell rang, and there was a delivery or something like that, it would affect our practice. It would cause some form of disruption. And that's what our world is like. It's full of different experiences, different events unfolding around us. And this is a practice where we learn how to center ourselves into the stillness, that space around the mind, around the thoughts, so that we begin developing the ability to be more grounded, more balanced, more still, irrespective of the events around us, the people around us, the circumstances. Bring yourself back to your breath. I'll ring the bell, and this time slightly change the pace of your breathing. Once you hear the bell, begin the process of breathing in as deeply as you can, even reaching the capacity of your lungs and your stomach, pausing for just a moment just to experience what it feels like to be so full, and then taking in a little bit more air. Again pausing, and then releasing your breath as slowly and as gently as you can. And so the pace of your breathing is about to change. And continuing with this new pace of breathing, this new rhythm, and now beginning to visualize your nasal passage through which you are breathing. Beginning to visualize your nasal passage as you would a bridge, a passage leading from this world around us and outside of us into the world of stillness within. And so, as you breathe out, you enter back into this world outside where my voice is, where your computers are, where the people are, where all of those sounds and the sensations around your body are, where your thoughts are. And then when you breathe in, visualize yourself diving, almost as though the surface of your body was like the surface of the sea and the ocean. In fact, it is in this practice. Visualize your skin and everything outside of it as your skin becoming the surface of the ocean, and each breath allowing you to dive into underneath that surface where it is a lot more quieter, where for brief moments you get glimpses into the stillness underneath the ocean. And we all know how the mind works, so give yourself magical breathing abilities, or oxygen tanks, or whatever it is that you need to survive underneath the surface, but feel its stillness. Each breath in taking you deeper and deeper, and then notice the surface of the ocean, how it's full of waves. No matter how still it looks, as if you get closer to the surface of the ocean, there are many, countless waves, many different movements. And we will, in this visualization practice, we'll just imagine that every single one of those waves represents one of those experiences outside of us. The different people that we know, and one of them, or a few of them, might represent our financial situation. Some of them might be the work projects, the artistic projects, the postman about to, ringing the doorbell, mobile phones going off. Many different waves. And for many of us, we've entered into this practice because we're a little bit tired of attempting to control those waves, which is what we often try to do. We want people to be different. We want them to behave in a way that would make us feel more comfortable, so that they may appreciate us. And we depend so much on the way we are perceived, the way they behave. The same with work, the same with our bank accounts, our accomplishments. Many different waves, and it gets exhausting attempting to stop every single one of these waves, because you manage to control one, another one pops up there. And we know what that's like. And this is a practice where we stop attempting to control the environment around us, even though we can to an extent. For example, we've sat down in this practice and we've managed to control some of the waves. We've switched off our mobile phones or silenced them. We've turned off the televisions. We've turned off the radios. We've asked family members or flatmates to give us some privacy. So we can control, but not all. We can't control the postman from ringing the doorbell. We can't control that car alarm that's gone off. We can't control the dog that's barking on the street outside. And those are the waves which, instead of attempting to control them, we just breathe in and feel yourself enter underneath the surface. And this is a vast ocean. It's vast. It covers the whole planet. There is a lot of stillness here. Feel the sensations of within your nasal passage as the breath leads you underneath the surface. And each time you breathe in, bring an anchor that helps you to ground yourself, to literally anchor yourself into the stillness, where you can still notice what's happening in the surface by simply glancing upward. You can still see the waves, but they appear very differently from the space underneath. You can still see the silhouettes of boats, the silhouettes of birds, of clouds, of wind movements, of weather patterns. all of those events, circumstances, people. But it all feels different now as we enter into this state of allowing, which is what some teachers call this practice, the art of allowing. Because it is an art that is practiced. I'll ring the bell now, just to give you an opportunity to stretch your bodies, to get that sip of water, to find a new posture before we move into the final few minutes of our practice. Trying to keep the anchor, trying to keep hold of the anchor, almost as though you were watching yourself pick up that glass of water, almost as though you were watching your body move, your postures change, your stretch unfolding. But watching it from this space of silence and stillness and calm. In these final few minutes that we have together, let's simply be our own physicians, our own doctors. We'll move through a very quick body scan practice where we'll move through different parts of the body, releasing any remaining pockets of stress or tightness we may still be holding. The reason I call this practice one in which we become our own doctors is because it's a practice where we begin to recognize our own ability to heal our bodies. If you like, to even prescribe the perfect medicines for yourself. Simply because this body is a chemical factory. And most of the time, when the body stops having the ability to produce a particular chemical, such as insulin, a doctor prescribes a chemical called insulin that is injected into our body to bring the body back into balance. And the same thing with when we experience depressions or other illnesses. Chemicals are introduced into our body to bring about that balance, which the body already knows how to produce. And this is a practice where we simply stand aside because our bodies have, because of the stress we experience, because of the worries we experience, because of what we put ourselves through, we push against our immune systems and the body's own ability to produce these chemicals. And so this is a practice where, once again, we see the body as a separate entity and we step aside so that we no longer interfere with the body's own intelligence, which is called the immune system, which knows exactly what the body needs. I'll ring the bell for the different parts of the body. Let's begin with the crown, the top of the head. Feel the skin around the scalp loosening itself. Again, inviting these sound waves through the skin, through the bone, through the tissue underneath, including the brain. The back of the head, the facial muscles, the neck muscles, the tubes within the neck, the spinal column at the back of the neck, the shoulders loosening themselves, relaxing themselves, finding ease and rest. And now the arms, all the major muscle groups, the elbows, all the way down to the palms and the tips of the fingers. And now the upper body, where the chest is, the upper back, the shoulder blades, all of the organs within, welcoming these sound waves, and almost as though you're watching it from outside. And throughout this practice, your body's immune system is doing all that it needs. Not doing, it's simply being. The doing is removed, and health is your natural state. So long as we stop pushing against it, which is what we're doing now. The lower parts of the body, where the stomach is, the digestive system, the lower back, the lower part of the spinal column, the pelvic region, all of the organs within this area, including the points of contact with the surfaces underneath you. And now the legs, the major muscle groups, the joint, which is the knee, all the way down through the ankles, the soles of the feet, and into the toes. And now your whole body, just scanning through it, noticing if there are any remaining pockets that you would like to release. And even though you're about to hear the final bell, this practice continues. It continues because this practice continues. You will find yourself bringing the stillness with you. It may last a few hours, it may last the whole evening, but this is a practice where every moment becomes a new opportunity to tap into this stillness and allow this process of healing and repairing to simply continue. And now for the final bell. Which marks the beginning of the real practice, where we bring the stillness with us. We once again surface back to that surface of the ocean, where the waves are, where the clouds are, where the wind patterns are, where the birds are and the boats are. But something's changed because we know of the stillness underneath the surface, and we know we have the ability to tap into it at will.